And I also hope that you had, pardon, an amazing afternoon. All right, so today we are going to be doing our grade 4 English lesson on adverbs that compare. So we're going to be doing our grade 4 English lesson on adverb that compare, right? So in our previous lesson we did adjectives that compare, and now we're going to do adverbs that compare. So before we go into the lesson, you are going to log into the A plus students.ca, and you're going to log in with your username as well as your password. And then we're going to select the subject of language art, right? So we are grade 4. All right, so once we have selected the subject of language arts, grade 4, right, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adverbs that compare. So, like I said in our previous lesson, we did adjectives that compare, and we spoke about comparative adjectives and superlative adjectives, right? And now we're going to do adverbs that compare. All right, let's go into use adverbs to compare. All right, so we use adverbs to compare action, right? So we use adjectives to compare adverbs, sorry, to compare action, right? Because remember we said adverbs, it either tells us about a verb, or it tells us about another adverb, or it tells us about an adjective, right? So we do use adverbs to compare actions, right? It's like something that we're doing. And we also have comparative adverbs and we have superlative adverbs, right? And comparative adverbs, it compares two actions that are done. So comparative adverbs, it compares two actions that are done. And then we have superlative adverbs that compares more than two actions that are done, or how more than two actions are done, right? So we have comparative adverbs as well as superlative adverbs. And comparative adverbs, it compares how two actions are done, and superlative adverbs, it compares how more than two actions are done. All right. So for adverbs, right, that have so for adverbs that have one syllable, right, we add er. So we add er if the adverb has one syllable, right? And then we basically make a comparative adverb. So basically, comparative adverb, right? Let me write it here. So a comparative adverb, right? It compares two actions that are done, and we also add er. So we add er to a comparative adverb, right? And we say that is adverbs that has one syllable, right? So we add er to our adverb, right? That is showing two actions that is being done. But then we add est to make the superlative adverb, which means that superlative adverbs that compares how more than two actions are done, we add over here est to our adverb, right? So once again, you can use adverbs to compare actions, right? And we have comparative adverbs and we have superlative adverbs, right? And our comparative adverbs, it compares how two actions are done. So the two actions that are shown how it's being done, we then add er to that comparative adverb. Then we have superlative adverbs, right, which compares how more than two actions are done, right? And we then add est to that adverb, right? So we then have our base word first, right? So say for example, we have the adverb of soon. So soon is our base word. Now, if we compare, let's say two actions that are being done, then we can say soon, sooner, right? It shows the two actions that is being compared, right? Or that is being done. So it is sooner. So er was then added to that adverb, right? To show comparative, right? Then we have superlative, right? It is where we compare how more than two actions are being done, and we add est to that adverb. So we add est to that adverb, right? So for example, we have soon, sooner, and soonest. So these are basically comparative adverbs, and then we have superlative adverbs, right? And comparative adverbs, it shows how two action would compares how two actions are done. And then we have superlative adverbs, right, which compare how more than two actions are done, right? So we just add either er to show comparative, and we show est as the superlative adverb. All right, for adverbs, right, that have more than one syllable. So if it has more than one syllable, we then add more to make the comparative adverb, and we add most to make the superlative adverb, right? So it will be like, for example, more something or most something, right? So the same as with comparative adverbs that shows one syllable, right? We add er um, when we show two actions that is being done. Now, if we have more than one syllable, right, still two actions that's being done, we just add more to the or more in front of the adverb, right? And we add most in front of the superlative adverb. All right. So here we have an example, right? We have our base word, which is safely, right? So we have safely as our adverb. So if we were to compare two, so if we were to compare two actions that is being done, so we have safely. So if we compare two actions that is being done, but with two syllable, with more than one syllable, and then we can say more safely. So more safely. That shows the comparative adverbs, right? So it shows comparative adverbs. It still shows how two actions are being done, but it has more than one syllable, right? Then, if we want to also compare how more than two actions are being done, but the adverb have more than one syllable, right? And then we add most to the adverb, and we call that superlative adverbs, right? So most safely. So we have safely as our adverb. Comparative adverb, we have more safely. And the superlative adverb, we have the most safely, right? And for the adverb, say for example, we have an adverb early, right? So early, then it means that we drop the Y. Let me write it down. So say for example, we have early, right? Then it means that we drop the Y, right? And then we add I-E-R. And now our word becomes earlier, right? You see, the Y has been removed, right? And we only added I-E-R to make it earlier, right? So for adverbs early, we drop the Y and we add I-E-R to make the comparative adverb, right? And we add I-E-S-T to make the superlative adverb. So which means that earlier, drop the Y, I-E-R, and then earliest, right? Which means that we also still drop the Y, we add I-E-S-T, right? So it becomes earliest, right? All right, so now here we have an example of our base word, which is early, as mentioned with the examples that we basically made as to how we drop the Y. So we have the base word early, right? And then our comparative, right, is earlier, where we say that we dropped the Y and we added IER. And then we added the IEST, right, to make it superlative. And we also said that we dropped the Y of early and we added the IEST, right, to show the superlative adverb within that, either that word, that sentence, or so on, right? All right, so now, so we need to complete the sentence with the correct form of adverb, right? It says, today the express train ran. We must either choose between, I'm going to use the base word, which is slow, the comparative, which is slower, and the superlative, which is slowest, right? So it says today the express train ran. Is it slow than the ordinary train, slower than the ordinary train, or slowest than the ordinary train? So we need to choose the correct form of adverb to complete that sentence. So, which means that in this case, we are comparing to actions that is being done, right? So we can say that slower than the ordinary train. So slower is our correct answer, right? So we say that slower, it ends in ER and it's a comparative adverb which compares how two actions are being done. And then slowest, which wasn't the correct answer, it ends in EST and it is superlative, right? It compares how more than two actions are done, right? The slower was our answer. The plant with the red flowers grows of all Eden's plants, right? So they either want us to choose the word. So this seeing that gradually, right? So the our base word is gradually, right? And gradually has got more than one syllable, right? Which means that we either need to add more or most. So gradually, and then we either say more gradually or we say most gradually. right? So now we either need to choose the comparative form or the superlative form. So the plant with the red flowers, it grows of all Eden's plants, right? If you compare the red flowers compared to all the other flowers, then it means that we are going to use the superlative form, because the superlative form, it basically compares more than two actions that are done. So the plant with the red flowers grow most gradually, most gradually of all Eden's plants, right? So most gradually, it shows the superlative form, right? Most gradually shows the superlative form in that sentence. And then Sadie speaks to the captain than Hector does. Oh gosh. Right? So we are gonna make pick up that. So we're gonna say politely. Oh no, not politely, polite. And then we have politely. Okay, let's say politely. Then we have more politely. So which means that politely has got more than one syllable. And then we have most politely. So we need to choose one of these words. Politely, more politely, or most politely to basically complete the sentence. So Sadie speaks, is it politely to the captain? Then Hector does. So seeing that there's um, more than one syllable, we're either going to choose more or most, right? So always say Sadie speaks more politely to the captain than Hector does, or she spoke most politely to the captain than Hector does. So in this case, two actions are being compared. So we're going to choose more politely, right? Because Sadie speaks more politely than to the captain than Hector does, only comparing two actions. So we choose more politely than choosing most politely. All right, so that is basically use adverbs to compare, right? So before we go to the test, let us go to over here, right? So here we say adverbs. Adverbs describe a verb, an adjective, or it describes another adverb, right? And it also answers the questions below. So adverbs, they describe either or ask questions, for example, like how, right? So if it asks questions like how, usually the adverb that tells us how, it ends in ly, right? So adverbs that ask the questions how is, for example, like easily, happily, loudly, quickly, quietly, sadly, silently, slowly, politely, and many more, right? So that is adjectives that tells us how, right? And remember, we said that adjectives that tells us how, they mainly or usually ends in ly, right? Then we have adverbs that either tells us how often. So if it tells us how often, and then it is, for example, always, every day, frequently, never, often, once, seldom, or sometimes, right? So these are adverbs that either tells us how often, right? Then we have adverbs, right, which ask the question when. So adverbs that ask the question when, right? So if we maybe answer the question when, then it is words. We can use words like after, before, early, now, since, soon, today, or yesterday, right? So those that answers questions when, right? And then it also answers questions like where, right? Which is away, everywhere, yeah, home, inside, near, outside, or there, right? So these are all adverbs, right? And we said an adverb describes a verb, an adjective, or another adverb, right? And answers the questions either how often, it answers the question when, or it answers where, right? So these are adverbs, right? So with adverbs, right, and now we remember we are talking about use adverbs to compare. So with using comparative adverbs, right, adverbs that compare, we have positive adverbs, right? Then we have a comparative and we have a superlative adverbs. So the positive is basically the base, right, or the base word, and then from the base word you get your comparative adverb that compares two actions. And then we have a superlative adverb that compares more than two actions that is taking place, right? So, for example, if we have our base or positive adverbs, right? And then, for example, if we have soon, then the comparative is sooner. So we add an ER. And then the superlative is soonest, which we added an EST. And then we have fast, faster, and fastest. And the same with near, near, nearer, nearest, and early, earlier, and earliest. So this is supposed to be earlier, right? And when we have words like early, when it ends in a Y, then we drop the Y, and with the comparative adverb we add the ER, or with the superlative adverb, we drop the Y and we add the IEST, right? So those are how we use, or that is how we use the comparative adverbs, where we have a base word, then we have a comparative adverb, and we have a superlative adverb, right? And then we also have, and remember, these are adverbs also that maybe uses one syllable, like for example, soon, fast, near, early. But now, adverbs with more than one syllable, right? For example, happily, right? Greedily, joyfully, right? We then either add more to the comparative adverb or most to the superlative adverb, right? So we either say more happily or most happily, right? That is when it is you when we use two syllables or more, right? And then adverbs are used like more and most to compare. So more is being used for comparative adverb, and most is used as to show the superlative adverb, right? And there we have a few examples. All right, so with comparative and superlative adverbs, right, they also form adjectives, right? Because remember, we also say that an adverb, um, it tells us about the verb, adjective, as well as an adverb, right? So we actually don't want the adjective, we are busy with adverb. So let's remove that one. All right, so that is basically comparative or comparing adjectives, right? Not adjectives, adverbs, right? So this is comparing adverbs by either having a base word, comparative, or superlative adverbs. All right, so let's do our test before we come back and do an activity. All right, let's go to the test. All right, so we need to complete the sentence with the correct form of adverb. Hanson studies in college than he did in high school. So we are basically comparing college and high school. So if we're comparing college and high school, then we can say, is it most seriously or is it more seriously? Is comparative adverb or superlative adverb? All right, so in this case, it is comparing the college than he did in high school. So we can say it is more seriously, right? So he studies more seriously. It's comparative. Mrs. Kwan, Mrs. Kwan answered my question. So Mrs. Kwan answered my question. Is it more completely than Mr. Novak did, or most completely than Mr. Novak did? So Mrs. Kwan answered my question most completely than Mr. Novak did, or more completely than Mr. Novak did. So we need to choose the correct one. So if we compare the answers that Mrs. Kwan compared to Mr. Novak, then it means that it is a comparative adverb. So do we use most completely or more completely? All right, so we will say more completely. So Mrs. Kwan answered my question more completely than Mr. Novak did. So more completely. The scientists' experiment ended. Is it sooner than expected or soonest than expected? So the scientists' experiment ended sooner than expected or soonest than expected. All right, so we will say it ended sooner than expected. So sooner is the comparative adverb, right? The red locomotive roars. Is it loudest of all the trains or louder of all the trains? Right? So which means that the red locomotive is being compared to all of the other trains, right? Which means that it is two or more actions, right? Which is superlative. So do we use loudest or louder? So loudest or louder. All right. So the red locomotive roars louder. We actually supposed to say it's supposed to be loudest of all the trains because it is now being compared to not just one train but more than one train, right? Of all Mr. Avila's children, Marshall cleans the house the more carefully or the most carefully, right? Which means that Marshall is being compared to all of Mr. Avila's children, right? Which means it is more than two, which is more than two or more than one child that is being compared to, which means that it is a superlative adverb, right? And since we are using the word carefully, right? Carefully has more than two syllables, right? It has more than two syllables, which means we either use more or most. But in this case, it is superlative, right? Because Marshall is being compared to all Mr. Avila's children. So we're going to say most carefully, right? Which shows superlative adverb, right? Mrs. Buckley sings. Is it more sweetly than a songbird or most sweetly than a songbird? So Mrs. Buckley sings more sweetly than a songbird or most sweetly than a songbird. So we need to choose the best or the correct form of adverb, either comparative or superlative. In this case, we are going to choose the comparative adverb, right? So if it's a comparative adverb, and then we're going to say she sings more sweetly than a songbird. So it's more sweetly, right? The tall knight acted the, is it more selfishly or the most selfishly of all the knights? Which means that we are now comparing the tall knight to all the other knights, right? Which means that it is going to be a superlative adverb, right? So with it being a superlative adverb, we then add most, right? So it's going to be most selfishly. So the tall knights acted the most selfishly of all the knights. All right, let's do two more. Of all his homework, of all his homework, Tony worked. Is it most gladly on his art project or more gladly on his art project, right? So we are comparing the art project that he worked on compared to all of his homework, which means that it is superlative. It's a superlative adverb. So with it being superlative adverb, do we add more gladly or most gladly, right? So which means that we will say, of all his homework, Tony worked most gladly on his art project, right? So most, because that is a superlative adverb. Then the last one is the plant with the red flowers grows. Is it more gradually of all Erin's plants or most gradually of Erin's plants? In this case, it is a superlative adverb, right? Because the red flowers, it is being compared to all the other plants in Erin's garden. So we will say that the plant with the red flowers grow most gradually of all Eden's plants. Right. All right. So that is basically using adverbs to compare, right? And that is the test that we did on using adverbs to compare. So now let's go and do an activity, right? On using adverbs. Okay. So it says circle the adverbs. You need to complete the sentences using the adverbs from the word bank, right? And the words in the word bank is early, mouse, always, carefully, soon, helicopter, quietly, eventually, bear, near, skillfully, salmon, bus, privately, or normally, right? So we need to choose the correct or circle the correct adverb from the within the word bank. All right, so if we circle the adverbs within the word bank first, right? Before completing the sentence using the different adverbs, then we will say early. Always is always also one frequency, soon. Where, near, normally. Let's take that one also. Eventually, quietly, and skillfully. Right? So these are the ones that we have, right? So that is 10 altogether. All right, so the first one is already done for us, right? So Melanie carefully took the eggs out of the fridge. So carefully is the adverb that was selected within the box, right? So that shows how, right, he took the eggs out of the fridge. Then we have Andrew and Lenny painted the fence, right? So they painted the fence. So we can then say they skillfully painted the fence. So they skillfully painted the fence. Mona arrived. Is it early for her riding lesson? Right? We can maybe say early for her riding lesson. Right? This is a chat we need to have. This is a chat we need to have. Is it soon or eventually? No, this is a chat we need to have. Let's say soon, right? So soon we need to have this chat. They will take the attendance folder to the office. So they will, is it always? They will always, oh, first, they will, sorry, finish reading this book. So we need to choose the correct one. I think soon is supposed to be this one, so they will soon finish reading this book. I think soon needs to be there. So they will soon finish reading the book. Let's put soon over here. So soon, right? Finish reading this book. All right. She takes the attendance folder to the office, right? So we can maybe say she always takes the attendance folder to the office. Michael gets to go to Pop's store. So Michael normally gets to go to Pop's store, right? So we can say normally. So he normally gets to go with Pops to the store. Freddie tiptoed up the stairs. So quietly, because if you tiptoe, then you do it quietly, right? And the movie I want to see is coming out. So the movie I want to see is coming out. Do we say eventually? So we need to choose the correct one. So this is a check we need to have. I feel this is eventually. This is supposed to be, it's coming out. Okay, so place the flowers in the vase. Do we say near the window? Right, so we chose near, we chose normally, we chose always, we have carefully, we have quietly, skillfully, we have early, right? So there's two missing. Which one didn't we? Privately and eventually. So the movie I want to see is coming out. Yes, so the chat we need to have privately. It's a private chat that we need to have. And then eventually, right? All right. So that is our adverbs that we first circled from the word bank, and then we also used those adverbs to complete the sentences. So now we're going to underline the adverbs in each of the sentence. So yeah, it says she ran to school quickly. So quickly is our adverb that we have identified within that sentence. Her mother sang quietly as she drifted off to sleep. So quietly is our adverb over there. The birds flew gracefully above the lake. All right, so we'll choose gracefully. His mother shouted furiously at them. So we will choose furiously because that is how the mother shouted. Peter tapped his dog lightly on the head. So how did he tap? Lightly. The teacher kindly handed her the certificate. So kindly. And then Mary accidentally hit Amy with her arm. Accidentally, right? The old man down the street mysteriously disappeared. So we have mysteriously because it seems like most of these are just, it's basically telling us or answering the question how. And fortunately, the car was not damaged after the crash. So fortunately, the car was not damaged after the crash. Let's just go fortunately, and they eventually made it to their destination. Right? So these are adverbs within the sentences that we have basically identified. All right, so this is now the last activity that we're doing, right? It says, can you spot the adverbs in each sentence below? And then identify which noun or verb they are describing. So the boy carefully built a tower of bricks. The tower was so tall that it touched the ceiling, which means that carefully is our adverb. And it tells us about the tower, right? I went shopping with my mom and bought a new dress. I danced around happily when I got home, right? So happily is our adverb, right? Describing basically the new dress. Or let's say the shopping, right? This is quite tricky because it can either describe the new dress, that is why she's happy, or the shopping. So I went shopping, let's just say the new dress, because that is actually why she's happy. The dog has long, shiny hair and pointy nose. The dog barks loudly with its owner's return. So we're describing the dog, right? That barks loudly. I love greedily. I love greedily eating my pancakes in the morning. Maple syrup and blueberries are my favorite toppings. So we can say greedily, and it describes eating the pancakes. Let's just say pancakes, right? And then the bank securely locks the door every night to make sure that the money stays safe. So securely, and it describes the bank, right? So these are adverbs, right? And we had to identify the adverb as well as what is being described. All right, so that is basically it when it comes to adverbs, and we spoke about adverbs that compare, right? So that is the end of our lesson on adverbs that compare and using the adverbs to compare, right? So thank you very much for joining our lesson. You should have an amazing evening further. Goodbye.